Hey everybody, welcome to the Conscious Love Show. Whether you are single, you are in a relationship, or you're healing a broken heart, this show is here to inspire you, to remind you how beautiful, lovable, and amazing you truly are, and to give you the practical tools and insights to navigate from wherever you are right now to the loving relationship that you so deeply want to have. My name is Shane Kohler. I'm a certified transformational coach and trainer with over a decade experience helping people release their trauma and open their hearts to love. I've delivered seminars all over the world, coached thousands of people through my online platforms and programs, and every week I'm coming straight to you with the hottest insights and the best teachers around, bringing you powerful resources and profound conversations to heal your relationship with love, dating, and yourself. I'm so grateful you're here, and if it's your first time, welcome. You can count on me to always show up for you with my very best and a commitment to learn and grow myself so I can serve you to my maximum ability. Thanks so much for tuning into the show. I've got some awesome things planned for you today. So without further ado, let's dive in. Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Conscious Love Show. Shane Kohler here. Pleasure to be on with you today. Today we're going to be speaking about powerful communication to create conscious love. What I want to start by just presencing today's idea and, why is it important for us to talk about this? And I think so many of us don't realize how powerful we are in terms of our ability to move a relationship in a certain direction. And I see so many people, whether they come to me in private coaching or whether they come in through my Inspired Love program, but I see so many people who come in and start talking about, a situation that they are currently in or a situation that they have recently been in and how the relationship may have fallen apart for one reason or another, how things didn't quite work out the way they were supposed to. And when we dive into it, when we start really getting into kind of the nuts and bolts of it and, what was really happening there, something I often find is that they were not communicating in a way that would have led to the result they wanted to. They were afraid to communicate, or they thought there was a better way to get there. Like rather than, clear communication, maybe I can just kind of beat around the bush a little bit or get there in another way. And time again, I see relationships either failing, or if they're not completely failing, like they're getting into really difficult territory. There's a lot of resentment built up. There's a lot of confusion built up. I mean, people go as far as cheating on someone simply because the communication wasn't there. The needs weren't getting met. They didn't know how to talk about it. And so rather than communicating with their partner about it, they'll just go cheat, because that's easier than actually vulnerably communicating with someone. I mean, communication is the most powerful tool we have to move a relationship in the direction that we want it to go. And yet, rather than communicate, we'll do so many other things. We'll play so many other games versus just honestly and authentically communicating. And so today's episode is designed to really help you with that clear, powerful communications, to help you know what to talk about, when to talk about it, how to talk about it, to help you identify some of the barriers you might have in terms of actually communicating the way you want to, right? In terms of getting you and your partner or the person you're dating on the same page so that the relationship can move in the right direction. I know some of you might even hear that and you might be like, oh, communication, that doesn't sound like a particularly exciting topic. Well, when you really get how powerful it is, it becomes very exciting, right? When you really get that, like, your ability to communicate is your ability to create. We've often heard this said, in the beginning, there was what? There was the word, right? And I know I'm getting a little biblical on you right now. I mean, the Bible is one of the holiest books in the world. And it literally starts with that sentence, in the beginning, there was the word. And a lot of the schools of thought that I've been trained in and a lot of the things I've learned around even manifesting or creating, it begins with your ability to speak your truth. It begins with your ability to say what you want. It begins with your ability to ask for what you want. It begins with even clarifying the words within your own self is step one. And then step two is being able to verbally express those in the world, right? So in the beginning of everything that we want to create or attract in our life, it begins with our words. It begins with us clarifying, again, the words within our own mind, within our own heart, and then having the courage to put that out in the world, to speak that out in the world. And that is how we manifest. That is how we create. And so today I'm going to be talking about the power of communication in relationships. And, again, some of the reasons we don't do it, some of the ways that we avoid it, all the things that kind of happen when we do that. The first thing I want to talk about, and I think this is really the biggest issue here, is that so many of us don't feel worthy of communicating. So many of us don't feel like we deserve to speak our truth, to have it be heard. We're afraid that if we do, if I really tell this person I'm dating or my partner, if I really tell them what I want, if I really ask for what I want, if I tell them what's on my heart, if I make myself vulnerable in that way, I'm going to be rejected, or they're going to leave me, or they're going to be angry at me for it. And there are valid reasons for this. And I think this comes from, for most of us, it comes from our upbringing, and it also comes from our past relationship experiences. I mean, probably all of us, if you're listening to this right now, have been in one or two relationships where anytime we used our voice, we were kind of shut down or chastised for it, or made small, or made less than for somehow using our voice, right? So I think a lot of us have had these experiences, and most of us, with few exceptions, most of us grew up in an environment where if you were to clearly communicate to your parents, I want this, or I need this, or I feel this, a lot of our parents just weren't receptive to that kind of stuff. It's like, shut up and go to your room, or children are to be seen and not heard, and all this kind of stuff that we grew up with, right? So I think to start, most of us have been raised within a context that said using your voice is wrong. Communicating about your needs is wrong. Asking for what you want is wrong. When you do that, you're going to be rejected. You're going to be put down. You're going to be shamed. You're going to be punished, right? And most of us, before we even have real conscious thoughts of our own, that message has been deeply ingrained in us. So then you find yourself, 20, 30, 40 years later in a relationship, having a need, having a desire, having a problem, having something that needs to be communicated about. And rather than honestly, vulnerably, authentically speaking to your partner what is on your heart and expecting that you're going to be received, expecting that you're going to be held, expecting that you're going to be heard, expecting that what you say is going to matter to that person, right? We kind of start with this preconceived notion that they're not going to care. Or we start with the idea that I better do whatever I need to do to make them happy, to make sure I'm not upsetting them or disrupting them or ruining things in some kind of way, right? Like, I better start by making myself smaller in order to keep this relationship. Because if I take up too much space, I'm going to lose the person, right? Or I'm going to be rejected, or I'm going to be punished in some way. I want to say a lot of this doesn't even necessarily have to do with the person we're in relationship with. Like, again, a lot of us don't even give the person a chance to show us that they care because we're so committed to the way we believe it is. It's so ingrained in us that, we're not going to be loved. We're not going to be appreciated. We're not going to be accepted. We're not going to be heard, that we don't even give them a chance to prove us otherwise. And that's something I'm going to talk about today, is how many possibly amazing relationships that could work out, end up failing because we don't even give the relationship a chance. And so many of us try to do everything other than communicate, right? Other than just really be honest with the person, other than just really ask for what we want. We try to do everything else rather than communicate. We try all these tricks and all these manipulative games and all these tactics, and, we try to be perfect, or we try to be distant, or we try to withhold our love and our affection in the hopes that they're going to get the message. And then when they get the message, then we'll give it back to them. We do all this stuff versus just simply like opening ourselves up and being vulnerable and saying, hey, like, this is what's on my heart. This is what I need. This is what I'm concerned about. And I think it's worth stating as well, because of kind of the cultural situation that I've been talking about here, with how much we've been shamed around communicating, with how much we've been rejected around communicating, and so on and so forth, is there are a lot of people in the world that are not able to receive our communication. And the best way to discover who those people are is to communicate with them, right? Like, if someone is not able to receive your communication, if someone is not able to really hear you and understand what's on your heart and be compassionate and empathetic to that and work together with you, if somebody is not able to meet you there, it's better to find that out sooner rather than later. And the best way to find that out is to practice authentic, vulnerable communication with them. Like, when you start practicing that with people, it becomes very obvious very quickly who can do it and who can't. It becomes very apparent very quickly. And then you can easily go, okay, well, this person's not available for the kind of communication I want to have. That means we can't have the kind of relationship I want to have. So better to cut my losses now before I get more invested in this person. But we don't do that. We try to keep the person. We try to hold on to the person. We try to, again, play these manipulative games and these different things to be able to somehow keep this person around when there's somebody that we don't really want anyway, right? It's somebody that's not a fit for us anyway. And so these are the things I want to explore today. I want to really deep dive on this topic. In speaking about worthiness and feeling worthy enough to communicate, something I want to start with is just, how do we create that, right? If you don't already have that, how do you create that? And I've shared this quote many times on the podcast. I wish I could remember who said it, but it's a pretty famous quote. And she said something to the effect of, I speak my truth even if it's with a shaking voice. And this is something that I've coached so many of my clients on over the years, is you've got to first identify and clarify your truth. You've got to know what you want to communicate. And then you've got to find it within yourself to put it out there. And so many of us are waiting until we're going to magically feel different, right? I'm going to wait until some magical confidence falls on me out of the sky, and then I'm going to do it. And it's like, that's not how it works, right? Like that is not how anything in life works. You've got to become the person who is capable. And when you become the person who is capable, then you will have the results that your capability is able to generate. But if you're magically waiting until you feel better about it, if you're waiting for some magical thing to happen where it becomes easier and suddenly you have the perfect words and the confidence and the perfect person who's willing to listen, like, you're going to be waiting for the rest of your life. And the relationship that you're hoping to have is going to pass you by. The conscious love that you're hoping to create is going to pass you by, because you will have been waiting for something to magically transform inside of you, versus really getting clear about what it is you need to ask for, what you need to communicate, and facing that fear, facing that rejection, facing that potential whatever it might be. And I know, like, that can be really scary. Like, I just want to give an example here. Like, this is something that has often come up with my clients and, kinds of conversations we have, where just a simple thing, like, let's say maybe you're dating someone for a couple of weeks or maybe a month. You've dating this person, you've been on a few dates, you're sending some text messages back and forth. It seems like something is picking up. But while it seems like this relationship is picking up, it also seems like I'm not getting what I need from this person. Maybe the communication is inconsistent. Maybe they're kind of hot and cold. Maybe you have a great date with them and then you don't hear anything from them afterward. I mean, any and all of these things could be possible. And what a lot of people do in a situation like this, and this is the easy way out, by the way, and I'm calling some of you out right now. Like, if you do this, you're taking the easy way out, and it's a cop out, and it's lame, and it's never going to work for you. Is what a lot of people do is they go, oh, they're just not cut out for the kind of relationship I want to have, so I'm just going to remove myself. Or this is the other thing we do, and this is equally a cop out and equally ineffective and equally lame, is we double down and try to be more for the person. And what I'm talking about here is really an avoidant approach versus an anxious approach. And a lot of us will vacillate between the two. A lot of us tend to always go to one or the other. But there's, kind of the avoidant approach of, oh, they're not cut out for the relationship I want, so I'm just going to dip. And then there's, oh, let me double down. Let me text them more often. Let me make myself more available. Let me not make any plans on the weekend just in case they call me. And then I want to make sure I'm available if they call me, right? So it can go one direction or the other, but both directions are equally lame. They're equally ineffective. They're equally a cop-out, and neither one of them are going to lead to the conscious relationship that you want to have. So put yourself in that position. You've been dating someone for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. It seems like things are taking off. There's interest, there's excitement, but it seems like you're also not getting what you need from this person, or the relationship isn't meeting all of your needs or meeting everything that you want it to. What do? You talk about it. You talk about it. And I want to acknowledge that that's a vulnerable thing. You don't know that much about this person. I mean, you know some things, but you don't know a lot. You don't know how they're going to handle it. You don't know how they're going to respond, but none of that really matters. You see, we base so much of what we're willing to do or who we're willing to be on how we think it's going to be received or how we think other people are going to respond to it. It doesn't matter how it's received. It doesn't matter how they respond to it, because the thing is, as I said earlier, if they're unable to handle it, if they're unable to have an honest conversation about needs and wants and desires in a relationship, then you need to drop them anyway. It doesn't matter how they're going to receive it or how they're going to handle it. What matters is you getting comfortable talking about it, because that is a skill that you're going to need in every single relationship you ever end up in. And saying, well, I'm only going to do it if I know it's going to be received well. I'm only going to do it if I know I'm not going to get rejected. I'm only going to do it if I know that they're going to want to give me what I'm asking for. That's you waiting for something that's probably never going to happen, because it's never going to happen until you ask for it. So the thing to do, if you put yourself in that situation, would be to, maybe after your next date, you bring it up. Or maybe one night when you're talking on the phone, you bring it up. Or maybe you send them a text message and you say, hey, I'm really enjoying getting to know you. This has been wonderful. It's been a lot of fun spending time with you. And I feel like there are some things I'd like to talk about. Do you think you could make some time tonight to talk to me? Even that request, most of us wouldn't even do. Just putting it out there, hey, I love getting to know you. This has been amazing. You seem like an awesome person. I'm really looking forward to seeing where this could go. And there are some things I want to talk about. Could we talk tonight? Could we make some time for that? That is such a powerful move. It's such a powerful move to just put it out there hey, there's some things I want to talk about. Can you make some time for it? This person is either going to say yes, no, or they're going to maybe renegotiate in some way. Well, tonight's not great. Could we talk tomorrow? But either way, you're getting so much information. If they say yes, it's awesome. This person responds to my requests. When I make a request, this person is a yes. That's a big green flag. If they're a no, I'm making a vulnerable, heartfelt request, and they're a no, that's a big red flag. And then if they're renegotiation, well, tonight's not great. Could we talk tomorrow night? That's a green flag, as long as they follow through with it and they show up, right? That's totally a green flag. So even in making that very simple request, you are getting so much information about who this person is. And what a lot of us do, as I said earlier, is we just dip out. It's oh, they're not giving me what I want. Peace. See you later. Or they're not giving me what I want. Let me try harder. Let me be more for them. As I said, those are both equally weak approaches. They're not powerful. And I think something worth saying here is neither one of those approaches communicate your value. Something that's coming to mind for me right now is one of the ladies in my Inspired Love program recently shared this. She shared that after she had been dating someone for about 3 weeks or something like that, she said, hey, I want to have a conversation about intentions. And what she meant was intentions about, what does this relationship mean to us? Where do we see this going? What are we doing here, kind of thing, right? So about 3 weeks in, she just says, hey, I want to have a conversation about intentions. And he goes, all right, let's do it. And he shared with her, he said, that was one of the sexiest things that I have ever seen a woman do. I have never had a woman request to talk to me about intentions. And so many of us, women and men both, are so afraid to bring up a conversation like that when it's like bringing up a conversation like that actually communicates your value. I want you to think about this. When you say to someone, listen, I want to talk about intentions with you. The unspoken communication in that is saying, I know that I'm worthy of commitment. I know that I am worthy enough that my time is not going to be wasted. I know that I am worthy of clarity. I know that I am worthy of your honest investment. And I want to have a conversation to see if I'm going to get that here. And if I'm not, then this relationship isn't something I want. That is such an incredible statement of value. And this is how I think deluded so many of us are about it, is we actually think that's weak. We actually think that asserting our value in a relationship is a weakness. We actually think that if I make myself vulnerable to the other person and let them know what's on my heart and let them know what I'm desiring, that I am somehow weak for doing that. And that's something you've got to correct. That is something that you have got to correct inside your own heart and inside your own mind, because that's the only way to communicate how powerful and worthy you really are. When you do this stuff like beating around the bush, I want to share a story from my past. And before I go into this, I want to say I'm not particularly proud of this, but this is where I was at the time. And, I'm not there now. I mean, I'm in a healthy, loving, conscious marriage now, but this is in my mid-20s and this is where I was at the time. I had just gotten out of a really toxic relationship with this woman who had a lot of issues, and I don't want to go into that, but it was a really toxic relationship. My self-esteem was lower than low. And I was looking for someone to boost me, right? I was looking for someone to make me feel better about myself. And I found someone who was willing to do that. Now, here's the thing. I liked this person just fine as a human being. She was a nice person. We had a good time together, but I never saw her as a lifelong partner. I never saw her as someone that oh yeah, she's the kind of person I want to marry, or she's the kind of person that, I want to commit to. I didn't see her that way. And again, I'm not saying I'm proud of this. I'm just being honest. And she was willing to accommodate all of my non-committal BS, all of my wishy-washy stuff. I didn't want to be her boyfriend. I didn't want to talk about the future. I made it clear, look, we're just hanging out. We're just having a good time. I don't want to talk about where this is going. I was really clear about that. I was really honest and direct about it. And you know what? You know how she responded? She was yeah, totally. We're just hanging out. We're just having a good time, which would have been fine if it was honest for her, but it wasn't. That's not what she wanted. And she was willing to pander to all my non-committal BS in order to try to keep me around, and in the hopes that I would somehow fall in love with her. And this is what I want anybody who's ever done this or who is currently doing this to understand. When you're doing that, nobody can fall in love with you, because you are sending a very clear message in the relationship that you are not worthy of that person's respect. When you are willing to pander to and accommodate somebody's non-committal BS, you are sending a very clear message in the relationship that says, I don't believe I'm worthy of your full commitment. I don't believe I'm worthy of your full respect. And so even if they like you as a person, even if they care about you to an extent, they will never see you as an equal partner. And the reason they will never see you as an equal partner is because you are not holding yourself as an equal partner. And some of you have got to let that sink in right now, because I know the kind of stuff that a lot of you entertain and a lot of you deal with. And you've got to start recognizing, before you even try to get a relationship, you've got to start recognizing what you actually deserve. You've got to start recognizing the kind of treatment that you deserve, and you've got to get the courage to start asking for it. Now, again, I said this earlier, speak your truth even if you do it with a shaking voice. And that's another thing that I think is an obstacle. We feel like we need to have the perfect words. We feel like we need to have perfect confidence. We feel like it's got to be poised and eloquent. And no, it doesn't. You can be crying when you say it. It calls forth so much respect when you have the courage to just put it out, no matter how it comes out. People are like, damn. And this is what I want you to understand, because I know this is our biggest fear, right? Our biggest fear is I'm going to put my heart out there. I'm going to cry. I'm going to be vulnerable. I'm going to share my needs. I'm going to share my wants. And that person is going to be like, sorry, I can't do that for you. I can't be that. And we're so afraid to experience that. And what I want to say is some of you need to experience that, because going through that one time or even a couple of times will completely transform you. I was talking to my assistant Rami yesterday, and she brought this up, that some of the people we talk to are like people in our families, and we talk about doing this healing work, and something that people often say is like, I'm so afraid that if I start crying, I'll never stop. I'm so afraid that if I let myself feel those dark, ugly, awful feelings, that I'll just get trapped in like a never-ending pit of darkness and I'll never come out of it. And so many of us are like tiptoeing around our lives, trying to not step on any uncomfortable landmines and just like keep everything cool and collected and smooth. And those of us who live that way, I'm sorry to say it, that's the living dead. Those are the people who are not really alive. And then if you're living that way, like if you're not willing to deal with and experience those dark, heavy, uncomfortable feelings, if you're not willing to face that feeling of rejection or abandonment or loss, and you're tiptoeing around your life and you're tiptoeing around your relationships, trying to make sure that nothing ever makes you too uncomfortable, or trying to make sure that nothing ever hurts you too much, or trying to make sure that you never have to face that rejection, what I'm going to tell you is all of your relationships and all of your experiences are going to be very shallow. They're going to lack depth. There's not going to be a real solid commitment there. Even if you're in a relationship, your relationship isn't going to be like a deep, conscious, loving relationship. It's going to be like a relationship where it's like, yeah, you buy my bullshit and I buy your bullshit, and we just smile at each other and we just, make it like it's all good, and like we never get deep with each other. And I know that nobody wants that, because I know the nature of human beings. Like, we all want to be deep. We all want to be seen and loved for who we truly are. Like, what we truly want in our soul is to completely reveal ourselves to another person and have that person completely love and accept us as we are. That's what we all crave in like the deepest places in our soul. But we're not willing to take the actions that would lead there. And this is what I want to say, is when you put yourself out there, when like you're crying and you're vulnerable and you're sharing your truth, even though you're terrified, even though your body is shaking, you're doing it anyway, and you're exposing yourself to this person. And let's say possibly that person just doesn't have the capacity for it. They're just like, I'm sorry, I can't be that for you. And then you have to deal with that rejection, and you have to deal with that abandonment. That is going to be a transformative experience for you. This is the place that so many of us are not willing to go, but when we go there, it completely transforms our life. Because what happens when you go to that place, maybe you do get that rejection, maybe you lose that relationship, but then what happens when you go to that place is now you have to love yourself. Where you were hoping the other person would love you, now you have to love yourself through that experience. And as you go through that very transformative experience, what begins to happen is you start to develop a resilience and a confidence and a trust. Like, if you were to put yourself out there completely vulnerably and get rejected, and then you had to love yourself through that, and maybe you went to therapy or joined some kind of program, or you got some support to help you through that, but you actually consciously worked through that experience. Then what starts to happen is you develop this internal confidence and this internal resilience. A type of fearlessness starts to develop within you. Like a sense of worthiness starts to develop within you, because what you start to recognize is like, I don't really need that from that person because I've learned how to give that to myself. Right? So I don't really need that from that person the way I thought I did. And then what starts to happen is it's like you start to live on a different basis, because up until that point, your whole life has been about tiptoeing around, not upsetting anybody, like trying to avoid rejection, trying to get people to like you, like walking away when someone didn't know exactly what you wanted or exactly how to treat you. And your whole life has been about avoiding discomfort. And then you start to develop the courage and the emotional resilience to face your fear, to face your discomfort, to put yourself out there, to be vulnerable. Then what starts to happen is you start to recognize that like whatever I thought I needed from other people is actually inside of myself. And so now if I'm going to have a relationship, if I'm going to be in like a relationship with someone, like it's got to be the real deal. And any relationship where you have to tiptoe around like that, it just starts to feel disgusting to you. it just starts to feel like, ooh, no, oh my God, like never would I. Because the love that you've cultivated within yourself is so much greater than that, right? The love that you've cultivated within yourself is so much greater than anything you would get from these surface level bullshit relationships. And so you start to feel like, listen, if I've got this much love inside of me, I'm not tolerating less from another person. And then your communication starts to show up powerfully. You start to have no resistance to just saying what you want, asking for what you want, calling someone to the plate, being like, listen, it's either going to be like this or we're just not going to work out. Because you recognize in a fundamental way, if a relationship doesn't have real potential, you don't want it. It's the most incredible thing in the world. And in my Inspired Love program, I witness these transformations constantly. And it's not about getting a partner. It's not about getting someone to love you. It's about getting to the place where your self-love, confidence, and your resilience is this complete. And then once you get to that place, it's no longer about like, I hope somebody picks me. I hope somebody chooses me. I hope somebody loves me. No, it's like people are all around me. I'm putting off this vibration that people are just eating up. I'm getting like text messages and phone calls and people are hitting me up on the dating app. Like, I'm getting like all this attention, and it's just a matter of me clarifying what I really want. I know people in my Inspired Love program who used to like pine over relationships and who used to like diminish themselves so much just to try to keep someone in their lives are now walking away from relationships because they're like, that person was okay, but they just really don't light my soul on fire, and I know I can do better. To me, like, that's more of a success than getting into a relationship. Like, so many people are just so desperate to get into a relationship. It's like, get to the place where you don't need a relationship, and then you just start looking at what kind of relationship you really want to have. That's the place you want to get to. That's the place that really feels good to be. Like, getting in a relationship when you're not ready for it doesn't feel good at all. Because all of your insecurities are in your face. Your needs aren't getting met. You don't know how to talk about it. You don't know how to ask for what you want. You're tiptoeing around trying to make sure this person doesn't leave you. It's miserable. Like, it's horrible. It's a horrible experience. Nobody should be in a relationship like that. We should only be in relationships that really fuel our soul. And so I want to talk a little bit more about some of these communication steps as we move more deeply into relationship with people. I want to share a story. This is actually a lady in my program who recently shared this last week. And like, talk about transformation. Like, this is a powerful one. So she's been in a relationship with this guy for about 6 months now. It's been amazing across the board. Like, she's been sharing, like, it's everything she's wanted. Great guy, like responsive, committed, dedicated. They have great communication. They talk about everything. She's like, never had a relationship like this in my life. It's by far the best relationship I've ever had in my life. And then a couple of months ago, maybe like 2 months ago, she told him that she loved him, and he didn't say it back. Now, I just want to share like how powerful she was in this interaction, because like, talk about like powerful communication. Now, first of all, I just want to share that like, how many of us, and you can call yourself out here, it's okay. Like, how many of us, if we were with someone for like 4 or 5 months and we finally said that we loved them and they didn't say it back, how many of us, that would be the end of the relationship right there? So many of us couldn't even handle that. And what this woman has done is she's not only been able to handle that, but she's been able to navigate that into where I'm about to tell you in a moment. But she's been able to navigate this experience and ultimately getting everything she wants. So first of all, she says, I love you. He doesn't say it back. And of course that hurts. Like, I think any of us, if we're real, like, that would hurt. But rather than being like, oh, I'm out of this, or rather than like falling all over herself and being pathetic and being like, why don't you love me? Like, she didn't do any of that. She instead said to him, okay, well, can we talk about that, right? Like, no pressure. I just want to know, what's that about? Where are you coming from with that? And this opened up a whole world of deep conversation for them, where he started sharing about his past. He started sharing about certain situations he's been in. He started sharing, like, I've only ever said that to one person in my life. And when I said that to that person, like, this is what happened. Like, it didn't go well, right? So now he's revealing himself. Now this thing that most people, it would be like a deal breaker or a barrier, actually became an opening for more depth in the relationship, but only because she knew how to communicate about it. only because she didn't get triggered and like retreat and withdraw and be like, oh my God, I can't handle this. Like, no, she stayed in her power. She stayed clear about what she wanted. She sat back and she's like, okay, well, in the last several months I've been with this guy, everything has been amazing. It's been the best relationship I've ever had by far. It's been incredible. And there's this one thing that like doesn't feel good to me. And she sat back and she's like, okay, is throwing out this entire relationship over this one little thing, is that worth it? And she came to the conclusion, she's like, no, it's not. You know, like this relationship is worth enough that throwing it out over this one little thing isn't worth it. And so she stuck with it and they had some conversations about it and she understood where he's coming from. And he's like, listen, I don't know like what I'm missing but I just, I want to get there. I'm just not there yet. And they were honest. They were communicating about it. And so this went on for a period of time. And then ultimately, I'll make a long story short here. It got to the point where it came back around a couple months down the road and he still hadn't said it. And she got to the point within herself where she's like, okay, it's getting to the point now where this is a deal breaker for me. It's getting to the point now where I don't think I can continue on in this relationship if he can't say this. One thing I want to point out here, and I think this is so important, is before she got to that point, she managed her own experience of the situation. This is something that so many of us don't know how to do, is we don't know how to sit with those uncomfortable feelings. We don't know how to process those uncomfortable feelings. Something scares us and we go into a reaction. And as I said earlier, the two reactions we usually go to are either avoidant withdrawal or we start like anxiously pandering to the person. Like, what do I have to do to make you love me, right? So rather than going into either reaction, which would have been her historical pattern, she's like, okay, what's coming up for me right now? Like, let me process the uncomfortable feelings. Let me sit with this. Let me learn from this. What is this revealing to me? She looked at how him not saying it was reflecting her relational wounds, things that came from her childhood, things that came from her past relationships, right? So this whole period of time where she had said, I love you, and he hadn't said it back, became a period of deep healing for her, where she learned how to be with herself through discomfort. Like, that is so powerful. Most of us don't want to deal with those feelings. Most of us want to avoid those feelings at all cost. She dove into the feelings. She sat with them. She allowed those feelings to open up a whole world for her. And then a couple months later, she circled back and she says, okay, I've done my work around this. I've given him all the time he needs to get clear about how he feels. I've now gotten to a place where it's becoming a deal breaker for me. If he can't tell me and share with me that he feels the same way I feel, then I'm going to leave. And she got to a place where she was actually willing to let the relationship go. Now, something I want to point out here, most of us don't communicate because we're not willing to let the relationship go. Most of us don't communicate because we're afraid, if I communicate, if I speak my truth, if I ask for that thing, if I share that thing, if I set that boundary, if whatever it is, if I do that, then that person, if they don't respond how I want to, then I'm going to have to leave, and I don't want to let the relationship go. So I'm just going to withhold my truth and try to hold on to the relationship instead, right? So she did her own work around it, as I said, and then she circles back and says, okay, I've done all my work around it. I'm ready to let this relationship go if he can't reciprocate these feelings. And then she communicated about it. And she's like, listen, this is not pressure. You have your process. You have your needs. I understand. I don't want to force your hand or anything, but this is my boundary. I've gotten to a place where I know how I feel about you. I know how I want this relationship to be. I know where I want this to go. I know how I want to feel with each other. And if you can't reciprocate that with me, then I need to leave this relationship. And she just sat down heart to heart and had that honest conversation with him. And you know what he did? He's like, I'm ready. And he said it. And then she goes, wow, he said it. Okay. And then she says to him, she's like, now, I really appreciate you saying it. That means a lot to me. That I needed to hear that. But she's like, I don't want you to feel like you have to say it all the time. I just needed to know that you feel it. Well, now he says it every day. He says it all the time, right? Because now that they've bridged that gap with each other, now that they've gone there together, it's like it's opened a whole new level and a whole new door for them. But you got to look at everything it took to get there. And so many people would be like, that's a red flag if he doesn't say it back. Well, not really. Not really when all the other green flags are there, when he's showing up for the relationship in every single way, and he has some wounding from his past that he's working through, and she was able to actually hold space for him as he worked through his own wounding. She was able to be that space that gave him enough safety and enough security that he felt like he could actually say it. And that's something that most of us just aren't willing to do because of our own wounding, because of our own fears of rejection and abandonment and so on. And, this is what I want to say is this is the work of being in a conscious relationship. This is the work. And I saw a comment come in a little while ago. Someone said, the person I'm dating said, I love you within 2 weeks of us dating. And that's beautiful and that's wonderful. But this is what I want you to understand is, you've been together for 2 weeks or a couple of months or however long it's been. And it's beautiful that you've already gotten to that place. I think that's wonderful. But this is something I want you to understand. The same process that I just described this person going through, the two of you are going to have to go through that in your own way and in your own time. And it might not be about this topic. It might be about a different topic. But here's the thing. Every single relationship, if you truly want to have a conscious relationship, it's going to push you to those scary, dark places. We've got to stop thinking about relationships as just a way to make ourselves happy and get all our needs met and get love from someone. That is such a shallow interpretation of what a relationship is. And it's not even real. And if you're struggling with that idea, when I say that's not real, this is what I want you to think about. How many relationships have you been in that didn't work out? How many relationships have you been in that didn't get to a challenging or uncomfortable place? Zero. There's not a single relationship in the world that doesn't reach a challenging or uncomfortable place. It just never, ever happens. And most of us have this very naive idea that someday we're going to meet someone and it's just going to be magical and it's just going to feel great and everything's going to work out and we're just going to ride off into the sunset together. And we're basing that on a euphoric experience that we have in the first few months of a relationship, or we're basing that on something we've seen in the movies, but that's not actually real. There's not a single relationship in the world that doesn't get to a challenging or uncomfortable place. And for most people, when the relationship they're in gets to a challenging or uncomfortable place, the first thing they do is they turn and walk away. They say wrong relationship and they check out. The second thing they do is they, again, try to pander or bend over backwards to accommodate or make the relationship better. Some people just numb themselves. There are so many couples who have been married for 20 years or, 30 years or just some incredible amount of time. And they stopped relating with each other a long time ago, right? There are so many couples that they have no real relationship. They have a roommate situation going on. They have more like a business partnership where they both fulfill their roles and maintain a household and raise children and do whatever they do. But there's not a lot of actual relating happening between them. And these are all the ways that we survive relationships when we don't know how to get deep with someone, when we're not willing to face those uncomfortable places. And even in those relationships, there's usually a lot of fighting. There's usually a lot of resentment. There's usually a lot of each other going to their friends and complaining about their partner. Oh, they don't do this or they don't do that, or right? There's usually a lot of that kind of stuff. And they just smile at each other in the face and then they secretly resent each other and they're not getting their needs met and they complain to their friends about it and their life is largely miserable. And it's because there's so much of the uncomfortable stuff that they're just not dealing with. And so if you're in those early stages of a relationship and it feels amazing right now, beautiful. And I don't want to take that from you. I really don't. New love is some of the most incredible things we can experience. So I don't want to take that from you, but I also don't want you to be blindsided when that dynamic starts to change. And when in the first couple of months, you had this incredible deep connection with each other and you felt so in love and you were like, oh my God, I can never imagine what I would be angry at this person about. And then for different reasons, that dynamic starts to change. I don't want you to suddenly think, oh, it was the wrong relationship, or what a lot of people do. Oh, they were a narcissist and they just fooled me the whole time. No, they weren't a narcissist. They didn't fool you. You just got to a more real place with them. You just got to a place where both of you weren't pretending anymore, where both of you weren't necessarily putting your best foot forward. And now more of the truth is coming out. And again, that's the time to start communicating. That's the time to start saying what's on your heart. That's the time to start asking those difficult questions. That's the time to start saying, hey, creating boundaries, right? Like sometimes in a relationship, somebody will do something that's offensive to the other person. My wife was talking to me about this, about her ex-husband. And they were at a party or something, and he had said or done something, I don't even remember what it was, but he had said or done something that was like really offensive to her. Like she was like, I can't believe you just said that. And now that relationship didn't work out for a lot of reasons, but my point in saying that is a lot of people wouldn't talk about that. A lot of people would be like, oh, that's a red flag, I'm out the door. But what she did was she said, hey, like, I want to talk to you about something. What you said or what you did, I didn't appreciate that. Like, that's not okay with me. And in this relationship, I'm not going to tolerate things like that. And you know what? He never did it again. Just by her simply speaking up and communicating a boundary. He never did it again. I said this in the beginning, but I want to come back to it. Our words are the most powerful tool we have. Our willingness to speak our truth. Our willingness to call out that elephant in the room. I want to give a few practical examples here before we close out today. If you're getting to know someone and you're wondering where you stand with them and you're trying to read between the lines on the text messages and you're going to your friends and you're like, well, they said this or they said that. What do you think that means? Like, you need to stop trying to be a detective and you need to ask that person. And I'm going to tell you exactly how to ask them. You say something like this. Hey, we've been seeing each other for a while now, maybe a month or a couple of months or a couple of weeks, whatever it is. And, I'm starting to develop some feelings here. Like, I see myself starting to get attached. I see myself starting to really imagine this relationship going somewhere. And I feel like it's time for us to talk about that and get a feeling for what we both want here. And I want to know if you feel the same way. Boom. Just like that. You're sharing what's honest for you. You're sharing your truth. You're putting yourself out there, you're vulnerable, and you're giving them the opportunity to reciprocate that. So many of you will say, well, I need the other person to do it first. Well, how can you expect someone to give you something you're not willing to give them? The responsibility is always on the more conscious person in the relationship to initiate. And if you're listening to this conversation right now, you're probably the more conscious person. So the responsibility is yours. But here's the magic of it. Once you open that up, you create a certain context in the relationship of how you communicate with each other. So if you're willing to take that stance that, look, I'm the most conscious person, so I'm going to be the one who's going to do it. And then what you're doing is you're setting the standard for how you communicate with each other. You're inviting that person into that kind of dialogue with you. Do you see how powerful that is? Where if you had never had the courage to take that leap and be honest with that person in that way, you would have never set that standard in the relationship, and your relationship never would have elevated to that point. This is how powerful you are. And when you deny that ability, you're denying your own power to create the relationship you want. I said this earlier, but I want to say it again. So many of us are walking away from relationships that could work if we just got the courage to communicate authentically. So many of us are assuming that this person is the wrong person for us because it's easier to assume that they're the wrong person than it is to be vulnerable with them. And you say, well, that's so weak. That's so pathetic to be like, I have feelings and I'm seeing this relationship going somewhere and I want something from you. That's so weak. That's so vulnerable. That's so pathetic. Well, first of all, it's not. It's one of the most courageous things a person could do. And courage is not pathetic. But secondly, if that person doesn't have the capacity to honor your courage, if that person doesn't have the capacity to go, wow, like, it is incredibly courageous that you just brought that up and thank you. And yes, I am feeling the same way, or I don't know how I'm feeling. But like, if that person doesn't have the capacity to meet you on a level, then like, let me tell you something. They're going to find out how not pathetic you are when the next thing that comes out of your mouth is, listen, if that's how you're going to respond to my vulnerability, then I don't think this relationship is going to work. Right? You see, so many of us will walk away from a relationship before we have that conversation, but not after. And after is the proper time to walk, not before. If you walk before, you never know what would have happened if you had the conversation. But if you walk after, you can clearly move forward knowing that you gave the relationship everything you could and it just wasn't the right fit. You see, I'm not saying that your communication is always going to be received in the way you want it to. I mean, like, let me tell you, my wife and I been together 8 years and going on more, and, God bless. Our communication is not always received in the way we want it to be. We have both faced rejection from each other on so many occasions for different reasons, usually because of misunderstanding, right? Like usually because we weren't really understanding what the other person was saying. And sometimes that's how it is. Sometimes it's similar to the story I just shared about the woman who said, "I loved you," and he didn't say it back. Sometimes the answer is not resolved in an instant. Sometimes it becomes about, okay, well, I'm not getting what I want in this moment. But when I step back and look at the relationship, when I step back and look at the human being I'm with, I see that this is an incredible relationship overall. I see that this is an incredible human being. And so if I'm not getting what I need in this exact moment, I can be patient as we figure this out. And some things take some time. Some things take several conversations. I want to share this. Some couples don't have the sex life they want to have, and it's because they don't know how to communicate about it. Neither person wants to be vulnerable enough to go to their partner and say, "I have a sexual need that I want to be met." And so rather than exposing themselves and being vulnerable with their partner in that way, and this is men and women, it's not just one of them, they just settle for not having the sex life they want to have. So many people don't get things like text messages or flowers or whatever, right? Like, so many people don't get the things they want just because they're not willing to ask for it. I see it all the time. I put up a post on Instagram yesterday. I said, "Ladies, what's something you want men to do more often in dating?" So many of the comments, like I'd say probably 50% of the comments were like, "Ask me on a date, take initiative, make a plan, do something." This is my counter challenge to the women who say that. Okay, have you told them that's what you want? You're chatting with a guy on a dating app going, "Oh my God, when is he going to ask me out?" Have you told him that you want to be asked out? Or are you just complaining about it on Instagram? Powerful question. I know I'm confronting some of you right now, but if you're not getting what you want in life, there's a strong chance that it's because you're not asking for it. Now, there are men out there who just don't give a fuck. Like, there are. And I'm not going to pretend that's not the case. But this is the most beautiful thing about asking for what you want. When you ask for what you want, you give someone the opportunity to give it to you. And if they don't give it to you, well, now you know that they're not what you want, right? If you're on a dating app with someone and you're going, "Oh my God, when are they going to ask me out?" Tell them, "Hey, I would love for you to ask me out sometime soon," right? Like, let them know, "Hey, why don't you ask me out so we can finally go on a date," right? Just put it out there. And if they then don't do it, well, now you know they're just not even worth your time. But I know a lot of men struggle to understand what women want, how they want it, when they want it. A lot of men are probably chatting with you on dating apps, hoping to build some kind of rapport, hoping to build some kind of relationship that would then make you feel comfortable in them taking you out. And they don't even know that you're sitting there wondering why they're not asking you out. I think, and I want to end with this, and I'm going to open up for some questions in a moment. I want to say that we build up so much in our minds, and our egos are so fragile. And like, I started with this and I'm going to finish with this, is that, a lot of us came from a household and an upbringing where it was not okay to speak our truth, where it was not okay to use our voice. A lot of us were guilted and shamed and punished for speaking our truth. A lot of us were taught that, children are to be seen and not heard and these kinds of things. And a lot of our past relationships have reinforced those ideas. A lot of us have been with people who just didn't validate us. A lot of us have been with people who just didn't care. A lot of us have been with people who just treated us poorly. And we've developed a kind of like shell shock to that, right? Where it's like the fear of having to face that again, the fear of having to expose myself and be vulnerable and get rejected. We don't want to face that. We don't want to deal with that. And our egos have just become so fragile. And so everything we do in our relationships becomes about trying to boost our wounded pride. And as I've said already today, you're never going to get a healthy, conscious relationship just trying to boost your wounded pride. And we find that when we are willing to face those uncomfortable experiences, and yes, they are uncomfortable, right? Sometimes we do get rejected. Sometimes we do have to let someone go or somebody lets us go. Sometimes those things do happen. But when we can recognize that all we're really dealing with here are feelings. When you were a very young child, there were feelings that you felt that were scary or challenging or uncomfortable for you. And you developed trauma around that. And trauma doesn't mean you were beat or sexually abused or anything like that. It could obviously be those things. But what trauma actually is, I was recently talking to my coach about this. What trauma actually is an open loop that has never been resolved, right? And so if you were say 3 years old or 4 years old, and you went to your mother or your father crying, and let's say you were ignored or you were pushed aside or you were maybe even beat for it or something negative, you got some kind of negative response, you weren't held, you weren't loved, you weren't received in that. Well, then what happens is that opens a loop in your consciousness. And now you have this open loop running that says, I can't be vulnerable, right? There's this open loop running that says, I can't be vulnerable. And just because the loop opened when you were 3 or 4 years old doesn't mean it's not still running. Like, let me tell you, if you haven't closed that loop, it's running. And you might have gotten very crafty at being so perfect in every way that you never have to face the fact that it's still open. But every now and then something sneaks through your armor and it's like, ooh, and it hits and it hurts. And the way that we close those loops is by learning to feel the feelings that we were too afraid to feel at 3 or 4 years old. It's like bringing a completion to something that was never completed. There was something that was opened up, but it was never closed. And now it's just been running in the background our entire lives. And now it limits the intimacy and depth we can experience in relationships. And then we attract relationships that reinforce that lack of intimacy and that lack of depth, and on and on and on and on it goes. And so the first step is to start having the courage to face up to that, is to start recognizing that the only thing you're running from is a feeling. You put yourself out there and you communicate about something and you get rejected. The only thing you're dealing with is a feeling. And you've spent your whole life trying to avoid that feeling. And it's so liberating to recognize that you don't have to avoid it. You can just feel it. So many of us think that if we open ourselves up to that, we'll be crippled for life. No, you'll be crippled for some time. And when I say crippled, you'll be emotionally crippled, which means that you'll be hurting, which means that you'll be grieving something, which means that it'll come in waves, and you'll have waves of sadness and waves of pain, waves of loneliness and waves of loss. And they'll come in waves and they'll last for 15, 20, 30 minutes, and then they'll pass. And then another wave will come, and each time you bring that cycle into more and more completion. And as you bring that cycle to more and more completion, you become liberated from it. You become free. And then communicating the way I'm talking about here becomes natural. It becomes effortless. You know, I see these transformations all the time in my clients. I've seen it in myself. It's just so liberating when somebody can just be like, oh, I just ask for what I want. And if they're not ready to give it to me, then I'm just clear that I don't want them. And I don't take it personally. I don't get rejected. I don't get down on myself about it. I'm just like, oh, this isn't compatible. Okay, glad I know. Because that painful loop is no longer open. And because that painful loop is no longer open, you're free. You're free to live. You're free to be yourself. You're free to be authentic. You're free to love. You're free to ask for what you want. You're free to communicate about the difficult topics. And so what I want to do before I close out today, I'm going to open up for questions in a moment. I want to make an invitation for anyone. If this is resonating for you right now, if this conversation is touching you, if you know that this is real for you, I want to invite you to join us in the Inspired Love program. And this is a systematic process where we walk you through closing these open loops. We challenge you to take those powerful actions. And then by closing those loops and taking those powerful actions, facing that fear, sitting with that discomfort, allowing yourself to grieve and process whatever has been ungrieved and unprocessed in your life, you become this incredible liberated being. And then, like I said earlier, attracting love is kind of like a non-issue because it becomes more about choosing what you want versus hoping someone's going to choose you. And until you get to that place, relationships aren't even really worth it because they just suck. They just hurt. And so I want to invite you to join us in the Inspired Love program. And if you're with me live right now, you can just send me a DM and we'll give you the info to get started. If you're listening to this podcast later, not live, but if you're listening to this podcast, I'm going to leave the link in the description below. You can apply there. And last thing I want to say before I open up for questions is that if you do want to join us now through the entire month of July, I'm going to offer $1,000 off on the tuition of the program. So I don't do discounts very often. We're doing this for the summertime, people who want to make this the summer of love. So we're doing this for the summertime. I don't offer discounts very often, but now through the month of July, we're going to do a $1,000 discount on the tuition of the program. So again, if you've wanted to do it, or if you're listening now and you think you want to do it, this is the best time to get in. I probably won't offer another opportunity like this, maybe until New Year's. So this is the best time to get in. Don't wait. $1,000 off the tuition of the program. Go ahead and apply. We'll look forward to getting to know you. All right. So now I want to open up for questions. Just reading some of the comments here. We got some students on here with us today. Karen is saying, Amen. The Releasing and Inspired Love program closed the loops I didn't even know I had. I love that, Karen. Karen is someone, I just hope you don't mind me sharing. Karen is someone who has just had the most beautiful transformation. And I love you, Karen. You're phenomenal. And just to see the level of like passion and aliveness that has come inside of you, it's so beautiful. You have just blossomed in such an incredible way, and you're such a joy to have in the program. And thank you for being here today, and thank you for sharing. Rami says, me too. The Inspired Love program changed my life. Yes, it did. Rami's story is incredible. If you listen to the podcast, Rami shared her whole story on the podcast, and it's just amazing. If you're interested, go to Conscious Love Show podcast and listen to Rami's story because it's phenomenal. First question. This is from Mylane Lefterook. If you share with someone that a certain action or behavior is not going to be tolerated and they continue to do so, what should be said? This is a nuanced question. And I mean, the short answer is like, if you set a boundary and someone crosses that boundary, it's a deal breaker. It's a red flag, like done. But there's some nuance to this because like I said earlier, sometimes my wife and I have had certain issues where like we've communicated about it and it hasn't necessarily landed the way we wanted it to. And we've had to go back and forth sometimes, right? So I think it depends a lot on the relationship. It depends a lot on who the person is. I think you've got to take into account the overall situation. And you've got to say like, okay, there's this one issue that we're struggling with, but does the overall situation justify trying to work through this issue with the person? Or is the overall situation kind of shitty to begin with, and this is just a deal breaker, right? Like if the overall situation is kind of shitty to begin with, and then this thing is just like the straw that breaks the camel's back, then drop it. But if the overall situation is amazing, and there's this one thing that you're struggling with, well, then you might want to have some multiple conversations about it. And so that might look like, hey, a couple of weeks ago, you did X, Y, or Z, and I shared about how that makes me feel. And I shared that, that's something that I can't tolerate or I can't accept in a relationship. And I noticed that you continue to do it. And so I just wanted to check in. Was what I said clear? Did you misunderstand? Or like, do we need to talk about it again? I need to be honest. Like, this is really important to me. And if we can't find alignment on this, then that's going to be a deal breaker for me. Like, it really is. But I also think you're really great. I also really love the relationship we have. So, I would love to like get on the same page about this. Like, what wasn't clear about it? Like, you might say something like that, right? Sometimes revisiting it a few times, if the relationship warrants it. But then that's a personal decision. That's a personal, like, trusting your intuition, trusting yourself. The story I shared earlier, like about the woman who said, I love you, right? Like a lot of people would have been out, but she trusted herself. She trusted her intuition. She said, no, the relationship is worth it. And so like, I want to give this a chance. I don't just want to walk out because one thing happened that I don't like when there's so much good here. That was her personal decision based on trusting her intuition, based on navigating the relationship in alignment with her truth. In other situations, if she had felt that she was being manipulated, that she was being taken advantage of, that she was being led on, if she had felt that the relationship wasn't solid, and then she said that and it wasn't reciprocated, then that might have been like, you know what, this just isn't the right relationship. So there's a lot of nuance to that. But I think you've got to continue talking about it until you're either clear that this is not the right relationship or until the behavior stops. But you can't just accept it because then you're accepting disrespect. So great question. And thank you for asking. Hope you find your way with it. I got one more question here, and then I'm going to close out for the day. Any thoughts on over communicating? I sometimes jump the gun and share hurt feelings, but it comes across as criticizing. Oh, great question. So powerful communication is usually about I statements. If it comes across as criticizing, chances are you're using you statements versus I statements. Now, something I spoke about earlier today, but I just want to bring it back in this question, is that when you're communicating, especially about challenging or sensitive things, you want to do it from a regulated place. A lot of us, when we're communicating from like a wounded place. And it's like, you're not meeting my needs, or you're not doing this, or you're not doing that, or why are you like this, or why can't you be like this? That's not really healthy communication. You want to regulate your experience first. You want to deal with the wounding first so that you can communicate from a regulated place. So for example, let's say you've been dating someone for a while and they used to be super attentive with text messages and phone calls and making you a priority and things like that. And then the further you've got into the relationship, it seems like their attentiveness has fallen off a little, right? And you're getting triggered by this. And you're like, they used to show up. They're not showing up now. What's wrong with them? Were they just manipulating me? You start telling yourself stories, right? You're getting into a dysregulated place. And so what you want to do before you try to talk to them about it is you want to regulate your experience. And regulating your experience looks like this. It's like, okay, so there's a need that's not being met here. There's a wound. There's a need, usually a childhood need, usually some kind of inner child wound that is hurting, right? Is being wounded. And that is not really your partner's responsibility, right? Now, your partner can be aware of that. Your partner can love you in that and support you in that, but it's not their responsibility to heal that. It's your responsibility to heal it. And so what you want to do is you want to address that wound. And again, I don't really have time to go into all of that today, but in the Inspired Love program, by the way, we have an entire module on inner child healing. But basically, you want to attend to this wound. You want to regulate yourself in that experience. You want to find some peace around it. And then what you want to do, once you have peace around it, you're going to come to a place from a regulated place. It looks like, okay, they were very attentive in the beginning. They're not so attentive now. Now, maybe they were just leading me on and pretending to be something they're not. And if that's the case, then I need to let this relationship go. Maybe they just got busy and they don't realize it's happening. And if that's the case, then we need to communicate about it and we need to clarify kind of expectations and boundaries and things, right? And so you get to this place where it's like, okay, I've dealt with the wound on myself. So I'm not bringing my wounding to my partner like, you're hurting me and now you need to make it better. No, I've done that already. I've cleared that up already. So now I'm coming to my partner and I'm talking about how the lack of attentiveness has made me feel. I'm talking about the kind of vision I have for a relationship. I'm asking for what I need in the relationship. I'm asking if they think they can do that, if they desire or want to have the same kind of relationship that I want to have. And I'm coming to it from a very clear place of like, look, if not, that's okay. If you don't want to have the same kind of relationship, that's okay. I'm not going to force that on you. But, like I appreciated when you would text me every day, or I appreciated when we would talk on the phone at night, or I appreciated when you made a point to plan dates with me every week, right? Like I appreciated those things. And when I think about the kind of relationship I want to be in, those things are all part of it. And part of the reason that I am so attracted to you and that I do love this relationship so much is because all those things were there. And recently, I don't know if you've gotten busy or I don't know if you've whatever, but it seems like a lot of what was there in the beginning isn't there now. And so I'm just wondering, do you still want it to be like that? Can we talk about having it be like that? And, that person's either going to be like, yeah, absolutely. I'm so sorry. I've just been busy. I didn't mean for it to come across that way. Or that person's going to be like, you know what? Like, I don't think I can, whatever. They're going to blow it off somehow. And then that clarifies for you, like, okay, now I know how to move forward. And by the way, like, if it comes across as criticizing, this is one thing I say is you're not really in a position to criticize anyone. Nobody owes you anything, right? Like if you start criticizing someone, how are you going to criticize them? They don't owe you anything. So it's not about criticizing. If you're criticizing, you're definitely coming at it from a dysregulated place. It's not about criticizing. It's about communicating. It's about getting on the same page. It's about clarifying expectations, clarifying desires, clarifying boundaries, clarifying needs. It's about discovering compatibility. Either the compatibility is there or it's not. But you don't need to criticize someone because you're not compatible with them. You're just not compatible. And if you weren't operating from a wounded place, you wouldn't feel the need to criticize them. That's the thing. If you weren't operating from that wounded place, their criticism wouldn't even be an issue. It would just be about, hey, let's discuss this and find out how compatible we are. If we are compatible, great. If we're not, that's okay too. But we just need to clarify some things. So beautiful question, Catherine. I'd say definitely lean into some of that personal work, the emotional regulating, the inner child healing. Really get practiced with that. And that's really going to support you in coming across less critical and just more open to collaboration, open to, unifying and identifying where the real compatibility is. So lots of love to you, Catherine. Thanks for the question. All right, we have just another question that came in. I'll take this one more question, and then that'll be it for today. Okay, this is from The Adventures Continue. Is it reasonable to ask a guy who is friends with a girl that posts extremely provocative pictures to stop engaging with her emotionally and to stop engaging with the posts? I have expressed that I don't like it. I also find myself feeling insecure and comparing myself to her, which I know is my own stuff, but I don't see myself with a guy who engages with that stuff. This is a good question. This is a really good question. Yes, I think it's appropriate. Now, you mentioned that they're friends, right? And I think in terms of following models on Instagram and liking that content and stuff, I definitely think that's a reasonable boundary. If this person is his friend, it's a little bit more murky because I don't think it's okay to really tell people who to be friends with and who not to. That being said, if she's posting all these provocative pictures and he's liking every single one of them and they're continually showing up on his feed, and you mentioned something also about him engaging with her emotionally. So, I feel like I would need more information about the situation, but what I'm reading here is that this is more than just a casual, this is his friend and she posts pictures and he likes her pictures sometimes. It sounds like there's more of a relationship there where he's liking all or a lot of her posts and that they have some kind of emotional interaction going on. So that's a different level, right? If it's beyond just, this is my friend and she posts pictures and every now and then they show up on my feed, right? That's a different level. I think it's definitely appropriate to say listen, if you want to have that kind of relationship with her, then go be in a relationship with her, right? That's putting myself in your shoes. I'd be listen, if you want to look at provocative pictures of her all the time and you want to have a deep emotional connection with her, then go be in a relationship with her. And if she doesn't want to be with you, then maybe you should have some boundaries with her. But trying to maintain some kind of relationship like that with her while also saying that you're with me, that's a deal breaker. That's what I'm hearing in this. And I think that's absolutely a deal breaker. It's look, if she's who you want to be with, then go be with her. But if you want to be with me, start paying attention to our emotional relationship, start engaging with my content, right? That's what I would say. And, I know especially when there are friendships, some of these lines can get kind of blurred. But look, I have a lot of female friends. I have hundreds of female clients over the years. I follow a lot of different women on social media and things. I have never interacted with any of them in a way that has made my wife uncomfortable. So I'm saying that to say that there are ways that men can carry themselves that are respectful to their partner. And it's not about limiting his friendships or telling him who he can and can't be friends with, but it is about using an I statement. It's coming from I don't want to have a relationship with someone who's engaging in these kinds of relationships with other women. That's my boundary. So I think that's really where you come at it from is this is my boundary. There was a conversation that came up in my Inspired Love program last week where we were talking about how some women kind of like to entertain attention from other guys, right? Where it's if I'm at the gym or if, there are guys hitting me up on social media or whatever, but it's I would never cheat on my partner. I would never do anything about it, but I just like to entertain the attention, right? It makes me feel good when a guy pays attention to me and it makes me feel like I'm pretty or I'm sexy or I'm desirable. And so when I get that attention, I feed into it a little bit. Not that I would ever cheat on my partner or anything like that, but it just makes me feel good, right? And I remember I had this conversation with an ex of mine, and this is actually one of the reasons she's my ex, is because we got into a big fight one day because some guy invited her out on his boat, and I'm like, so who's going? Just the two of you? He just wants to take you out on his boat for the day. And I'm like, do you really know this guy? Like, is he a close friend of yours? Like, it just screamed like inappropriate to me. And what I said to her, I was like, I don't want to restrict who you can hang out with, or I don't want to tell you like who you can be friends with or not. But this guy is clearly showing a romantic interest in you. He's clearly trying to pursue you. And you entertaining that kind of attention is disrespectful to our relationship. Even though I know that you're not going to do anything, and even though I know that like you're not going to let him do anything, you entertaining that attention from him is sending him the message that you don't really respect our relationship. And I'm not okay with that. Like, I don't want my partner to be out in the world insinuating to all these guys that they might have a chance. And so I think it's a similar kind of thing where it's not about restricting who he can and can't be friends with, but it's about saying like, I have certain standards for like how I want my partner to operate. I don't want you to be like giving attention to people when like that kind of attention should only be given to me. And I think that's a powerful line of respect that in a conscious relationship, we honor that. I'll share this, and this is the last thing I'll share on this topic. Contrasting my relationship with my wife with that relationship, I remember there was, when I first started dating my wife, we'd been together for maybe a few months, and there was this guy who was obviously trying to date her, and she was trying to enroll him in this training that we were doing. And so, she was keeping in touch with him because she's like, he said he was interested in the training, and she's like, yeah, I'd love to tell you about it. And he's like, yeah, let's talk about it. He's like, why don't you come over to my house and we can sit on my back porch and I'll open a bottle of wine and, we can talk about it. And she's like, there's a restaurant near my house that has a porch. Why don't we meet there and we can sit out on the porch there and have a glass of wine? Right. And when she told me that, I was like, thank you. I remember saying to her, I was like, thank you. And I shared with her this previous experience. And I was like, I was in a relationship with someone before who just did not understand that boundary. They just were not willing to create those lines with me. And it always bothered me. And like, it just showed me like very early on in our relationship with my wife that my wife understood that. Like, I didn't have to enforce that on her. I didn't have to police that. Like, I could just trust that when men were showing interest in her, she was going to handle it in a respectful way. So I think that's a very similar idea there. And I think it's totally okay to assert those kinds of boundaries. So thank you for the question. And yeah, communicate about it. See how he responds. All right, everybody. It's been wonderful being with you today. So much love. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Conscious Love Show podcast. You can find it on all major podcast platforms. Make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts most, if that's Apple or Spotify or Amazon or wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure to look for the Conscious Love Show and subscribe there so you don't miss an episode. I will be live here on Instagram every Tuesday, 12 p.m. Eastern time. I always look forward to being here and connecting with everybody. So I'll see you next week. Lots of love. Have a great rest of your week, and I'll see you next Tuesday. Take care, everyone. Bye. Thanks again for checking out the show. Please subscribe on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on the most. And I would love it so much if you leave a review and tell people what you think of us. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram @TheLivingRelationship to connect more closely. And I'm grateful to be supporting you on your journey to love.